Okay, going to our guest, Bob Fletcher, is a businessman, investigator, film producer, speaker, author, and all-around good guy. And I'm not going to go over his bio myself or even give you his website. I want him to do that because I like to have guests on in their maiden visit with us to describe how they woke up. And he woke up running right smack dab into the CIA. I woke up when the police were dealing drugs in the town where I lived and busting people who had them later. And then I spoke out and they threatened to kill me. So that's how I found the rabbit hole. Bob Fletcher joins us for the balance of the hour. Bob, great to have you on with us today. Tell us about yourself and how you woke up.
Very good, and it's my pleasure. Thanks a lot for having me on. And again, it's strange. You and I missed each other all this time. It's my fault. I should have screamed at you, I guess, earlier, and we could have shared some airtime. As far as how I got started, it's absolutely mind-boggling, and I'm going to really have to abbreviate this. I love to tell the whole in-depth story, but it takes so long that then it cuts into everything else that we might want to cover. I had a toy manufacturing company in Atlanta, Georgia, and this is in the mid-'80s, 1983, 84, 85, that period of time. I manufactured puppets and unique little baseball hats with everybody seen them. Originally was one of my ideas, and that was with the funny little animal faces on the front of them and all that stuff. And basically doing very well. We were expanding. I had a retail operation, and the toy is extraordinarily. My primary product was very, very unique, and we were selling them giant numbers. I couldn't even keep up with it. And I ran into a guy in New York City at a giant marketing and merchandising show. And as in those shows where they have 35,000 buyers show up at these gigantic exposés, and I just gathering up business cards of people that were interested in buying my product. And basically I would just gather it up, write a little note on the back, and put the card down with full intent to get back to him later on when I got back to Atlanta. I contact this one number that I look at on the card once I get back to my factory, and I look at it and I said, well, this is my address. And I looked at it again, and I said, yes, this is my address. And then I looked at it more carefully, and I realized that it was a guy that had an operation 100 feet from me in the same manufacturing area. And I could hit it with a stone. So, wow, I thought that was pretty strange. Anyhow, to make that long part of this rather short, apparently I had been targeted by this guy, and I think primarily because the previous 5 years of my life, I had an international marketing company and had actually been partners with the ambassador. Actually, he was the consulate general for the country of Liberia, and we were doing business with West Africa, et cetera, et cetera. And that was a couple years prior to my toy company. So I found out much later that was the reason I was targeted. Now, when I say targeted, here's what took place. I merged my business with this guy. He owned 2 or 3 companies, a gigantic company, or I say gigantic, well, it's a large national company where he sold novelty watches to 7-Eleven stores and things of that sort. You know, talking $100,000 at a time kind of contracts. So that was pretty big. And he employed 100 people with that company. So I thought I'd kind of hit pay dirt. All of a sudden, I had this business partner with tons of money to do what I needed to do with my toy company. Well, the bottom line was this guy was a major covert supplier of weapons for the Central Intelligence operations worldwide. And that's his intent with my company and with the other company that he had, which was his watch company, was using them as covert fronts to be wherever he wanted to be. In my case, he had a full intention of moving and having myself function as a courier into Angola. That's where the African connection comes in. And needless to say, it blew me away. The first couple of months was great. The money was flowing. This guy was going to do television advertising with my toys, and et cetera, et cetera. We were just going to go to the moon with what I was doing. However, when one day he said, "We're going to have some visitors. I want you to meet them," they turned out to be General Heine Adderholt and General John Singlaub, that people would meet a few years later in the Iran-Contra investigations. This guy was, by the way, his name, the covert operative's name is Gary Best, and his company was called Vista, and Vista International USA, and even changed the name of my company to Vista.
Long and short, why did you get out of it?
Well, in short, eventually after meeting generals and finding out about what was going on, or at least finding out partially what was going on, like I say, he wanted to bring me in to function as an international courier. The downside, he says, was that if you talk to the wrong guy, you're going to be killed. I thought that was kind of negative compared to the positives. Obviously,
you just wanted to sell toys above board in America and around the world and be a regular toy salesman.
You got it.
You didn't want to be a spy.
Absolutely. Just blew my mind. And, I mean, these guys were coming in and out. We were getting telexes at that time. There was no email. It was telex time back then. We would get telexes that were coded messages, and this fella, Gary Best, would tell me that, oh, by the way, this means one of our guys was just blown away over there, and so this operation had fallen down. I had come in on telephone conversations where he was selling and putting together contractual agreements for 747 aircraft, making as much as $10 million net profit on these guys.
You came into a high-level operation.
High level, unbelievably high level, because after finally I just said, hey, I got to get out of here. The guy owed me $250,000 that he hadn't paid me yet. I said, pay me up or give my toy company back. And he said, you're out of here. And if you say anything about what you've learned here, you're going to... And what he did, he didn't say anything verbally. He reached in his pocket, his vest pocket, pulled his hand out in the shape of a gun, pointed it towards my forehead, and pulled the trigger of the pretend gun.
Wow. Stay there. We got to go to break. You got to finish the story. Then this will be the first of many visits, and then we'll get into the weather weapons, all the other things you've been involved in and covered. Amazing, amazing. Bob Fletcher's our guest.
Everything we said came true. Everything we've done has been right.
BobFletcherInvestigations.com is his website. I should add, we have a mutual friend, Emilio Estevez, who actually got Charlie Sheen into, quote, conspiracies. Now, that's who got Charlie into it, and I've met him quite a few times and hung out with him. Great guy, really smart. He was looking at doing a story of Bob Fletcher's life. And why I haven't ever had Bob on to now, I'm still marveling, but I don't want to burn the time up repeating that. Obviously, we'll catch up in the 17 years I haven't had him because he's such an interesting fella. Finishing up your story and abbreviating it, then we'll get into the weather weapons, all the other stuff you started discovering after that, since then, and what you think of what's happening today with Obama and all the big developments. Bob, please continue.
Okay, yes, again, like I say, we have to really kind of compress the front end of this thing in terms of what happened. So here I am. I'm sitting in my own toy company has now been taken over. The contracts are done. This guy technically owns it. He hasn't paid for the agreement yet, and so he owes me a lot of money. The bottom line was the things that were going on were just so far over my head, and I was just again, I had done an awful lot in my life prior to this, so I certainly didn't consider myself to be naive. I mean, so much, that's another whole story, too, which included being in the music and record business. For many years, I was an executive with MCA Records. I was the promotion director that introduced Elton John to the United States of America. I was on the road with The Who, I mean, et cetera, et cetera. This was my prior, long before I got involved with my toy manufacturing. So, again, I don't consider myself naive, but as everybody else, I knew nothing about the unbelievable corruption at the highest levels of our country. And I, all of a sudden, was plopped into the middle of it. Now, first I thought, when I just left. I mean, I left with a threat on my life. I said, I'm going to get out of here. I said, but this guy, I'm going after him. He's fooling with the wrong guy. So I get with my lawyer friend right away, a friend of many years, and a lady and her husband who actually used to work for me. And I got with her and I said, spelled out this whole thing. And she said, well, this is, we just go in and file lawsuits against this guy and find out who the heck he is. Well, when I went first to, and again, I have to compress this or we're going to run out of time. I went to, believe it or not, I called the CIA. Okay? You can't talk to the CIA. They told me that. I tried to set up an appointment with somebody, and I said, you are the guys that have to look into this. So that was nothing. That went no place at all. Next point, I touched base with the ATF, with the firearms people. I said, this guy, a couple of weeks ago, threw the brochure on my desk telling me this was something new that we were going to start handling. I thought maybe it was going to be a new toy, and it was a Hellfire missile. This guy was putting together contractual agreements to supply the Hellfire missile to some of the covert operations at that time. He was in the middle of the Iran-Contra stuff. He was assisting General John Singlab, General Heine Adderholt, and General Richard Secord. And believe it or not, I met in my toy factory Bo Greitz. When he came back from one of his POW adventures, Bo came through the factory. I met Bo, and then, of course, later on, Bo and I end up speaking together on the same platforms, the same speaking engagements, and we became close friends, and he even ended up performing my wedding ceremony with my present wife. Anyhow, that's another whole complex, crazy story. But the bottom line was I left, was unable to get any place with finding out who this guy was, who he really was. Nobody, obviously, no cooperation. A year later, approximately 1986, 87, I see the Iran-Contra stuff is starting to be investigated. Senator John Kerry's people investigating. And I'm watching the TV, and I heard a name or two, and I said, these are the guys that were in my toy factory. So I called up, believe it or not, just called straight in, dialed in, and I contacted Senator John Kerry's office, and I said, these people that you said you didn't know who they were, I know who they are. So one thing led to another, and I became involved with the Iran-Contra investigations. I was interviewed as a witness, and I became a federal sworn witness in the Christic Institute's legal action against all of these armed smugglers.
You're a brave man, Bob Fletcher, joining us here today, and we'll be right back and get into the latest info with him. I always really enjoy the information that we get from folks who've been fighting tyranny 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And Bob Fletcher's been doing it since the mid-1980s when he ran smack dab into it. People that are ignorant who don't look at the info, they sometimes say, are you sure there's a corrupt shadow government? Which now it's out in the open. But are you sure? And it's the things I've seen, the things I've witnessed. Oh, yes, it's real. And, you know, here's Bob Fletcher, the same thing, Iran-Contra witness, all of this. To make a long story short, any other points on that? Then let's get into your journey of then discovering this whole shadow system.